Crowley.
Thanks. I mean, I think perhaps a different way to come at this is what's in it for the US, because I know Scott said there about the US walking away if we stick hard and fast to regulation and in other areas. And it may be, I mean, the point that David makes that in terms of tariffs for your sector, that's important. I think where we need to get to, and it really is more for John, in terms of whether there is more analysis that needs to be carried out, and is it Scottish Enterprise that needs to do that, and what are the sort of key sectors that are exporting into the United States? What are the key sectors that would be influenced by this? If you mentioned earlier, for example, in terms of American companies here, but perhaps not the best example was Amazon. Where if we look at the kind of employment standards in STUC, we're raising this when you talk about a race to the bottom, 0 hours contracts. Now, it's true that across in Dunfermline right now, people are glad to be working and having an income of some sort coming into the Christmas period, but that's not really the type of economy that we see for the future of Scotland. Surely it's about an economy that's a high-skilled, high-wage economy. And I can't help but think that in terms of regulation, go back a decade, and politicians were lining up, as were others, to talk about the light touch regulation that we needed to have within the financial sector. And then we have a global economic crash, and suddenly politicians are being blamed for that light touch. So in terms of regulation, I think these are issues. If I can really pull it back to this question of transparency, for me, it's not just the transparency of the negotiations themselves, because that's important, and I think David Martin and other MEPs that we took evidence for a few weeks ago said that there was greater transparency starting to come through. But it is the transparency of this whole agreement, because it is raising concerns, and the public are starting to become more interested in it. And hopefully the work of this committee, taking evidence for yourselves and others, will actually bring a greater transparency and understanding of what this agreement's about. So for example, I think, Alan, you in evidence talk about significant benefits to companies on both sides of the Atlantic, providing major boost in jobs and growth. My glass is always half full as well, but I think we need something a bit more that takes it a bit forward, because you do talk about raising global prosperity, yet right across the globe we have widespread inequality, deprivation and poverty, and America is perhaps one of the most unequal countries in the world, and people across Europe are starting to, I think, speak out about the levels of inequality that exist. So we do need the evidence to start backing that up. It can't just be,
But motherhood and apple pie. I appreciate that, but the point I've made earlier, it's very difficult to. The evidence shows that the reductions in tariffs will allow freer trade to flow, which will benefit exporters in Scotland. Reductions in regulations will reduce the duplications of costs of companies who currently have to comply with European regulations and then are put off by the costs of considering going across the Atlantic. As John mentioned, it's a very big step to make to set up your business in the US, and it's quite daunting to do. And if you're facing increased costs on new regulations, you might put it off. But the harsh reality, unfortunately, is if you look at the economic picture currently, you're seeing the challenges in Greece and other parts of the EU, where those economies are facing evidence of further slowdown. Thankfully, the American economy is continuing to grow apace, which then gives us opportunities to take advantage of that growth. And Scotland has, as David mentioned, has built up great historic links with the US, so the opportunities are there to try and build those links, and the TTIP can help achieve it. I don't think it isn't the issues raised over inequality and areas such as that. A trade agreement isn't going to, by any stretch of the imagination, tackle those kind of issues, but it is interesting to consider why the Canadian trade agreement hasn't raised anywhere near the same level of attention as the US-EU trade agreement. And on the 10th of January, the Glasgow City Council is hosting a dinner to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the birth of John Macdonald, the first Canadian Prime Minister, and Canadian foreign ministers are coming up to try and push forward the benefits of trade between Scotland and Canada. And it's a shame that TTIP has got politicised, I believe, unnecessarily.
The regulation, do you think that we are looking at more light touch regulation?
The point that Scott has made is that it will be at the highest level of regulation. It won't be a rush to the bottom. It will be maintaining high regulation so that consumers have confidence in products. We now have a transparent consumer who's very concerned with what they buy, and I don't see any evidence that there will be a rush to the bottom. Regulations will be maintained at a high, vigorous level, especially in the US, which has also been mentioned, is a very litigious society.
Alan, in your written evidence to the committee, you raised some issues around about the investor-state dispute mechanism, and we've had lots of evidence to this committee, whether even just in our Twitter feed, on very, very grave concerns about that. And you're saying, in your evidence, that it's a way to protect, and ensure that businesses aren't, discriminated against or whatever under, change to legislation and regimes within the actual host state, for instance. But if you look at the Egyptian model, where the Egyptian government increased their living wage, which maybe is where Alec is coming from as well, where they increased their living wage and then became subject to a challenge on that and costs related to that. How do you marry these two things up, that this is a good thing and it protects people, but when states actually take action and bringing their minimum wage up to a better level, then that has an impact on that state?
But I think the point I made earlier about the figures that have happened in the UK, that there's not been one case against the UK which has been found against us, and there are 43 cases which have been taken by UK companies who have faced harmful changes to their regulations which could impact upon their business and their jobs, that they have been successful in it. And I don't think because one business takes action against an Egyptian government, then that whole notion should be ruled out of hand, and that overinflated fears should be given currency.
Okay, and I take that on board very much so. But let's just say in the Smith Commission, the Scottish Government eventually, negotiates the ability to, change the minimum wage to a living wage. Would that then make us subject to something like the Egyptian situation?
It's unlikely, because with all due respect to the Egyptian economy, I don't think you're comparing like with like. The Scottish economy is a mature economy, and we have good standards of pay and good working conditions. And I take Alec's point about our contracts and those kind of issues, but by and large, we have a workforce which is well regulated and actions in place, and I think it's highly unlikely that that kind of action would be seen in Scotland.
Okay, Alec, did you want to continue?
Well, David's want to come in, but can I just, I want to pick this point with John in terms of Scottish enterprise and whether they can do much more detailed analysis and give this committee more information on the companies that are trading in America and the likely benefits. It's about the threats as well. I think there's opportunity, but there's also threats. What are they?
So I'd absolutely agree. We do need to undertake with our partners in industry that robust economic analysis of the opportunities and the challenges as a result of this. So I think that's something that we should definitely be doing with our partners. In terms of Scottish sectors exporting to the States, we've got some great examples: financial services, we've got Aberdeen Asset Management, Martin Currie, Bailey Gifford out in the States. In terms of energy, we've got Agreco with significant operations in North America, and we've got the Weir Group with 80 operations in North America, employing 4,600 out there. The Wood Group's US operations is the largest, with 34% of their global headcount. Food and drink, we've got Edrington with 5 locations in the US. We've got Albert Bartlett and Sons making deals around their rooster potatoes, and we've got small companies like Smarter Grid Solutions. So across the sectors, we've got Scottish companies doing well and active, and of all sizes, trading out in the States.
Just one final point, and it's energy, and that really raises a point in a sense. If you look at the American economy right now, shale gas seems to be having a major influence in driving that economy, driving down oil prices, and certainly finishing the coal industry in this country. The regulation of shale gas in America, I don't think, is up to the types of standards that are being talked about if shale gas proceeds in this country. Is that an example where there is a threat that American companies wanting to get in on shale gas here, and if we've got much tougher and tighter regulation, is that an example of conflict?
I doubt it on the basis that for example, the company that John mentioned, the Weir Group, they're heavily involved in supplying into the shale gas boom in the US, so Scotland's benefiting from the shale gas boom, and the engineering and manufacturing sector is benefiting from that currently, and we're all benefiting as consumers, reductions in the petrol prices of the shale gas boom. But I don't see any reason why there'd be a change in regulations to allow a flood of US companies in to take out whatever shale gas exists in Scotland. I think that's highly unlikely.
Okay. David.
Thank you. It was just a general point, just because it's been touched on a couple of times. I mean, part of the challenge here is, of course, we're still in negotiation, and so we don't actually know what the end point of that is, and that creates questions and uncertainty, and that's understandable. I think, therefore, it's certainly worth studying the EU-Canada agreement, because due to TTIP, that got over the line. That set the benchmark for what a next-generation free trade agreement looks like. That's probably the sort of area that TTIP will end up in, perhaps going further. But in terms of trying to understand what will be in that agreement, if the negotiation comes to a conclusion, the Canadian agreement is certainly worth taking the time to understand. And certainly when it comes to regulation and standards, that was about levelling up more than anything else.
Yeah, we've had some briefing from our very helpful Spice people on some of the other trade agreements, but maybe just drawing our attention to the Canadian one is very helpful. Thank you.